everyone and welcome! We covered the story of Kaisa and even the arrival of the Void in Icathia, but we still haven't mentioned two very important characters related to the Void. So today let's have a look at the Void Walker and the Prophet of the Void. But before that, let's look at the short description of the Void itself. Screaming into existence with the birth of the universe, the Void is a manifestation of the unknowable nothingness that lies beyond. It is a force of insatiable hunger, waiting through the eons until its masters, the mysterious Watchers, mark the final time of undoing. To be a mortal touched by this power is to suffer an agonizing glimpse of eternal unreality, enough to shatter even the strongest mind. Denizens of the Void Realm itself are construct creatures, often of only limited sentience, but tasked with a singular purpose: to usher in total oblivion across Runeterra. Cutting a burning swath through the darkest places of the world, Kassadin knows his days are numbered. A widely traveled Shuriman guide and adventurer, he had chosen to raise a family among the peaceful southern tribes, until the day his village was consumed by the Void. He vowed vengeance, combining a number of arcane artifacts and forbidden technologies for the struggles ahead. Finally, Kassadin set out for the wastelands of Icathia, ready to face any monstrous void construct in search for their self-proclaimed prophet, Malzahar. Kassadin started life as a lowly offcast, walking the harsh sands of the Great Sigh, alongside merchant caravans to draw predators away from their more valuable goods. He survived many of these treks across the desert, and began to serve less as a bait and more as a guide. The foreign tongues that sought his talents, Kassadin, or whom does the desert know, often slurred their Shuriman, and so he became fondly known as Kassadin in the back alleys and markets of Belzun. He spent many years exploring the ancient ruins of his homeland, making his employers exceedingly wealthy, but it wasn't until a dig near Zyrima that he found a treasure of his own. He fell in love with a woman from one of the desert tribes. With his wife and newborn daughter, Kassadin settled in a small village in the rocky canyons to the south. He was on the road often, his work sometimes requiring him to accompany particularly valuable relics to some faraway sponsor. But, no matter where his travels took him, Kassadin would always return with exciting tales from the world beyond. Journeying home from distant Piltover, Kassadin and his fellow caravaneers were watering their beasts at the oasis when they encountered the first terrified survivors stumbling out of the desert. They spoke of the disaster that had claimed their homes, as if the maw of the underworld itself had opened up to devour them. They had barely escaped with their lives. Fearing for his own family's safety, Kassadin left the others behind, riding hard, driving his mount almost to exhaustion. When he finally reached the place where his village had once stood, he found only shifting sand and rubble. He clawed at the debris until his hands bled, screaming out his wife and daughter's names, though no answer came. Days later, Kassadin's companions caught up to him, now just a broken and empty man weeping beneath the scorching sun. They dragged him back to Zyrima, but Kassadin would go no further. For years he tried to drown his grief, reduced to little more than a vagrant, until word reached town of the Prophet. Whispers of unspeakable horrors that dwelled beneath the earth, and of sacrifices made in their name chilled Kassadin to the bone. He knew well the legends of old Icathia, and the fate that befell that accursed place. If the Void had been deliberately drawn towards Shurima once more, then it had likely been the death of his entire village, and countless more besides. He also knew there were few, if any, who could stand against it. In that moment, Kassadin swore that he would avenge his wife and daughter by destroying this insidious prophet and the source of his abyssal power. He was a man who had made his living by finding safe paths through the most dangerous places, and resolved to arm himself with the most arcane and esoteric weapons ever known to Valoran, fused with Zonite ingenuity and blessed by Ionian spirit healers. He called in every favor he could, from scholars of antiques to common smugglers for their help in acquiring what he sought. Many called him a madman, believing this the last time they would ever see their old friend alive. Kassadin merely thanked them for their concerns and bid them farewell. He would face the Void alone. Last of all, he stole the infamous Netherblade of Horok, the sword that had slain 1,000 deceivers in the later days of the Empire. He could feel the cold pull of oblivion in its edge, but no longer had any regard for his own mortality, and nothing of his old life left to lose. Disguised in the robes of pilgrim, more than a decade since he has last set foot anywhere near the desolate land, Kassadin made his way into Icathia. He would go where no man was ever meant to walk. He would have his vengeance, even if it killed him. A zealous seer dedicated to the unification of all life, Malzahar truly believes the newly emerged void to be path to Runeterra's salvation. In the desert wastes of Shurima, he followed the voices that whispered in his mind, all the way to ancient Icathia. Amidst the ruins of that land, he gazed into the dark heart of the void itself, and he was gifted new power and purpose. Malzahar now sees himself as a shepherd, empowered to bring others into the fold, or release the voidling creatures that dwell beneath. Beneath the glare of the Shuriman sun, there have always been those blessed with the power of foresight. The only son of aging trinket peddlers, Malzahar did not realize his gift until his parents had already succumbed to a wasting sickness, leaving the young traumatized boy to fend for himself on the city streets of Amakra. He read fortunes in the gutter for a coin or scraps of bread. As his auguries proved more and more accurate, his reputation grew. He used his second sight to predict who a curious cameleer might marry, or where throwing daggers would land in a game of chance at the bazaar. Soon he began to receive patrons not dressed in dirtied sandals, but jeweled slippers. However, for all this, Malzahar could never see his own destiny. His future was hidden. Increasingly disillusioned with his success, he noted the common disparities of wealth. He witnessed those unhappy with their lives acting out in spiteful violence against one another. It was apparent to him that people were bound in a never-ending cycle of pain, often of their own making, and no hopeful prophecy seemed to be able to break it. Malzahar himself soon felt nothing but a sense of emptiness, finally relinquishing his mortal possessions and leaving Amakra for good. For years he roamed the land, from the trackless wastes of the lesser side to the ruins of the old Shurima. By distancing himself from others, he was alone with his thoughts at last. He divined not just how callous people could be, but also how corrupt the world might yet become. Fevering visions began to plague his waking hours, along with otherworldly whispers of war and strife, and endless suffering. He wandered far until the sands turned to salt. He could not know that he arrived in Icathia, a lost city ravaged in the wars of a bygone age. There, gazing into the depths of the ragged abyss, Malzahar opened his unsteady mind, desperate for understanding, and the void answered. That would have been the end of any other tale, and yet somehow Malzahar endured. What lay in the darkness below brushing against the soul of the broken seer, only for an instant, and yet its strange and unknowable energy saturated his mind completely. The lone figure that eventually strode out of Icathia was no longer just a man, but something greater. Malzahar had seen in the abyss an end to all the suffering he had witnessed in his mortal lifetime. He realized the future he had believed hidden from him all this time was in fact a vision of his true calling, to accelerate the world toward inevitable oblivion. He had to return to the people and spread word of the holy nothingness that would gladly embrace them, the willing and the non-believers alike. He would become the herald of the world's salvation. Among the nomads of the deep desert, he found his first disciples. Before their astonished eyes, he used the new void-given powers to rend the very earth itself, summoning chittering nightmarish creatures to carry away any who dared to deny him. Within a matter of months, strange rumors began to travel with the merchant caravans. Rumors of men and women gladly sacrificing themselves to the unseen powers, and of powerful quakes opening up the bedrock of Shurima in new fault lines hundreds of miles long. In the years since, Malzahar's legend had spread even to the northern ports. As followers of the prophet grown in numbers, nearby settlers are said to experience malefic vision grasping at their hearts, and fear gives rise to superstition. Even the hardy villagers of the far wastes now make offerings of livestock to appease the voidling creatures below. Little do they know, This only helps Malzahar in shepherding the coming of the end. And that was the story of Malzahar and Kassadin, two characters that will play a bigger role in the future. Especially since we now know that the story of the Void is the bigger overarching plotline. Also, notice how Malzahar's story mentioned that he crossed deserts of salt before he got into Icathia. This means that Icathia was cut off with salt in order to keep the Void back, because we know that salt is able to starve it out. Just a fun lore fact for those of you who are paying attention. But that's it for this video. So if you enjoyed it, feel free to rate the video and subscribe for more lore and news. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Discord if you'd like to chat. Once again, we are streaming pretty often, so have a look at our Twitch too. Our merch and P.O. Box will be in the description. Of course, massive shout out to our patrons for going the extra mile. I can't explain my gratitude enough. And with that, thank you all so much for being here and for your support. You know I really appreciate it. And as always, thank you come again.